Awesome.
about the bubble pricing. So, I mean, I think most of us have read the forum posts and checked out all of the reactions on Twitter and
Right.
the forum to and the announcements that Bubble has made themselves, but I haven't seen or heard anyone actually like discussing, why is the price changing, good or bad? Is it fair? So I thought it'd be cool to just do this live.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of questions surrounding this. I think the first one is, yeah, why is the price changing? That's an
Yeah.
important one to ask because is Bubble as a company, is their incentive to change the price because they need to make more money, make more profit for their stakeholders? Are they currently losing money with the structure of the pricing and they need to just restructure it where things are more sustainable for these apps that end up scaling, with thousands and thousands of users? I don't know. And that's where I think some of the communication from Bubble could be better. This was kind of sprung on a lot of people. And they definitely got a lot of sticker shock when they saw some of those work units,
Yeah.
their cost.
I mean, certainly a tricky like conversation no matter what they decided to do, right? Like any kind of pricing change when it impacts so many people and businesses are relying on it and freelancers are relying on it, like of course people's emotions are going to be high.
Right.
And it's it's a pricing discussion. It's always going to suck. You know what I mean? Like there like
Of course.
like it's going to suck a little bit no matter what. So
of course, yeah. I mean, nobody wants to pay more for the service that they're currently using right now.
yeah.
I mean, ideally, we would get better, things would improve, and our costs would go down. With computing and technology, a lot of the times that's kind of what happens.
And that's kind of the promise too. Like if you like
right.
it's in some of the posts from Bubble, they're saying like our infrastructure is going to improve over the next few quarters. Bulk operations are going to be more efficient and therefore cost less workflow units.
Right.
But it all seems so. I think at this point for everybody, it just seems very pie in the sky. Like, will you really deliver on the on what they're promising here? And it's just like everyone is kind of just like kind of with their hands up. And you brought up an interesting thing that I keep seeing, like a recurring theme in the forum posts of like, well, is this because the investors are trying to squeeze more money out of the users, right? And is Bubble a slave to the investment that they've taken? That 100 million that they've taken. I mean, what are your initial thoughts around that when you see those comments?
I mean, yeah, I think it's very important to determine the motive for this because Josh in his post today said that on Thursday morning, they're going to release an update that changes the weight value of how work units are calculated through all the different actions in Bubble. And that change is going to be did he say 30 to 90% cost decrease right off the bat?
Yeah.
And so that took them 7 days from announcing this price change to then being able to give people an up to 90% cost decrease. So I just don't understand the thinking there. Like, who is going to be setting those weight values and what's the motivation? Who are they going to what's the word? Who are they going to expense more? What's the word I'm thinking of?
Scour?
Yeah, like if they can decide what actions are more expensive for their platform, like how are they going to make those decisions? Who are they going to cater their platform to?
Okay,
and they're going to make API calls more expensive, and then that's going to be their cash cow action. Like, I don't understand how those decisions are going to be made from Bubble.
I see your point. I see that's a great point because it could definitely say like that would cater to one group of users over the other. And who's making those decisions at the end of the day? Is it the board of directors? Is it Emmanuel and Josh? Like who's to say, right? And that's so much power over so many other people's livelihood.
Yes.
Like all of my income comes from Bubble, so I'm like definitely impacted, probably more than most people, from this change. And like I try to, and I keep a cool head with this stuff. when, this wasn't a surprise to me. I was part of those initial conversations with Emmanuel and the team when they were like looking to see whether or not this, was going, like, how to communicate it. And I gave them my
Right.
honest feedback. And honestly, they didn't like vary too much from what they told us they were going to do. They were pretty
Absolutely.
transparent about how they rolled it out and what they told us they were going to roll out. So I think, I'm not seeing it from the perspective of somebody who just got the news and that was it. That was like workflow units and like that's it. So I was a little bit more prepared for this.
Sure.
And like not that even if I would have been like, no, we can't do this, like, not that that would have had any effect anyway. Like, no, like, they want a little bit of feedback, but it's not like one person really has the power to change any of the decisions that Bubble is going to make anyway.
No.
But I think the biggest thing like that, the biggest things for me that were like really hard to swallow, and this wasn't apparent to me before they made the announcement because we only had access to certain materials, was the tier level, the number of workflow units that are assigned to each plan. They seemed low, and also the way that, like, the number that I saw that I was consuming, right? Like, it
Sure.
was way higher than I thought
It
it would ever be.
That's that sticker shock that I think was the PR disaster from Bubble. That was the fallout. It wasn't that, like, the workflow units are a problem in theory on how they operate and that usage-based pricing needs to be a thing. I think most people are on board with that. That's how a
Yeah.
lot of services operate. But I think it was the announcement of, this is how things are going to be done, and here's how you can immediately check what your monthly cost is going to be on your app before we optimize anything. I think that the optimizations in the concept of workflow units should have been introduced before pricing was even in the discussion, because then people would be able to say, okay, this workflow unit is a thing. I've been looking at capacity for so long. Now I can look at workflow units. I naturally, as a developer, want to build an efficient, fast app that uses as little workflow units as possible. So if you introduced that concept to me 6 months ago, I would have already been seeing what can I do to reduce the load of my app. And then when you say, okay, now we're changing our pricing that's going to be based on these workflow units that you guys have all been experienced with for the past 6 months, our first tier has 175,000 workflow units. Well, then that's a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. And also, they would have a lot more data to set appropriate levels,
Plan
appropriate
levels.
tiers.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
great point. And that wasn't obvious to me either, right? Even
Right.
being like, that wasn't an obvious thing to me. But in retrospect, it's so clear that, like, it's so much information and change at one time, right?
Right.
Like, it's the pricing that's changing. You could stay on the legacy plan. You have 18 months to optimize your app. We're having these new optimization calls, and we're changing over our metric to the workflow units. This is what the workflow units consist of, right? That's so
Right.
much to digest in one
Yeah.
single announcement. So
And compound that on with the backlash, and then the, okay, well, it's going to stay like this, but things are going to change, but these are going to, like, we're not 100% sure. It really confuses the average user. And the average user, I mean, what they're marketing to a non-technical developer who wants to build app with no limits and everything, that I don't see that as attracting new customers if this is, if this is what's happening. Like, it just seems like a poor way to roll out this announcement, and I'm just disappointed because all of these developers and communities that love Bubble are starting to turn around and, like, look for a lifeboat. um, Companies that I've worked with, freelance agencies that I've worked with, I've been receiving notifications from them, like, basically having to let everyone know that this is affecting a lot of our customers, and we're on top of the situation. But I mean, everyone's on a high alert on what's going to happen next.
yeah, it certainly
And
feels like
it's
we're on the edge of our seats here.
right. And I just think that a lot of this pain could have been avoided, if if some of these things were introduced differently, if, like, the tools to understand workflow units were developed earlier. And I mean, that's probably my biggest frustration with Bubble is that now, having looked at some of these other development tools, Flutterflow, all these other things, it seems like there are features that have been built out there that Bubble has not caught up to, and it worries me about the development speed at Bubble. Are they going to keep up with the no code demand and what some of these other tools are offering, like mobile app deployment and um, you know just some of these really nice to have features.
Mm-hmm.
So
I am. What do you? I think what I will say about the pricing, and you kind of mentioned this before, is that I think it's fair. I think the idea of having your app be paid, or like the cost to you is dependent on how much of whatever you're using, page load, workflows,
horsepower,
yeah, like
like,
calls to the server, API calls.
yeah,
That all seems like a fair way to be billing for applications. So at its fundamental
right,
level, I think they're trying to be fair. And to the question of like,
yeah,
are they doing this to you know, um, squeeze more money out of their users? Is this really investor driven? I want to not believe that. I really don't want to believe that. I want to believe that they're doing this. They're trying to set themselves up for a platform that will, you know, or a system that will allow them to scale with their users, and
right.
everyone's making money together. I want to believe that, right? And
I do too. I certainly want to believe that. I have believed that for years
right.
now, and so that's why something like this is so difficult you know to comprehend. Yeah, it's
And someone told me today
impressive.
also that like they've invested so much time and effort in learning Bubble and building a business around it, um that they won't switch even if they were even if they were like it's like this change is not enough to switch. And that's also what I'm considering too. Like, will I
Sure.
use like I don't think I'll ever completely move off Bubble no matter what they do. I just know too
I don't
much
think
about
so.
it, you know what I mean? Like, but
Right.
there may be other situations where I'm like Jose asked right here. He said, how do they compare to other how does the new pricing compare to other platforms? There may be situations where I'm like, well, I don't know how much this is going to cost it in working. If I'm going to build
Right.
this on Bubble, I might consider, and it's a mobile first app.
Right.
I might consider like, okay, maybe Flutterflow is the right tool for that project. You know what I mean? It just kind of leans me one way or the other. But again,
Absolutely.
I think that, and truthfully, I don't know. It's kind of to answer this question, and Nick, help me out here. But I think that I don't really know how it stacks up to other platforms yet. I know that it's not as flat rated as it used to be,
Sure.
right? Which is what most of them do. Is like they try to put a flat rate here. Um, how are you thinking about
Right.
that?
So I'm I was Emmanuel asked me about the pricing changes back in March, and we talked about it. And a lot of the other platforms do this, and I think this is the way that most no code development platforms should charge. And that is a flat fee for access to the builder, flat monthly fee for access to the software. Like Adobe has Creative Cloud, they charge so much for each of those programs. And I think that should be the entry price to develop on Bubble. And then there should be that still usage based metric. Um, like with Flutterflow, they have a monthly charge for access to their development platform, and then the back end is on Google Firebase, and you're paying Firebase to handle all of the usage activity.
Okay.
So and
So it is really. It's almost like Bubble is catching up to the way that some other platforms are doing it, where it's like not so many of those. Like that's the storage is.
sure,
It scales with you, like the pricing scales with your application.
right. The one of the things though with like something like Flutterflow is there are multiple backends you could connect into, and Flutterflow, for example, is just the no code editor for Flutter code, and you can export that code and you can put it wherever. You own it. And I really would love Bubble to move in that direction. I mean, and make it where you can write code using Bubble's interface, because it is a fantastic way to develop. I think that they, translate a lot of things very, very well. And that's how I see Bubble. I see them as a translator for code.
Mm-hmm.
It's is like learning a language for me. And I would like to be able to write a program in Bubble and then just export that code. And if I want to use a cheap, server somewhere that, might not be reliable, but gives me a really low usage cost, then I could do that.
Definitely not the first time I've heard that as a wish list, like being able to export the code. That I know that turns, especially people who have a technical background, like the fact that they can't export the code from Bubble is almost a deal breaker in the beginning sometimes. So very, very,
Right.
I've heard that, I've heard that echoed quite a few times. Let's see what Michael has to say here. Mixed feelings about this. I can understand some of the outrage when people have to pay X more for their apps. However, I come from an environment where we develop traditional apps and literally pay tens of thousands of dollars in infrastructure costs. Okay, so this is a fair point. Are we
Absolutely.
spoiled, right? Like, are we spoiled?
Are we
as
spoiled? Are we
bubblers?
just? Well, yes, we're not used to having to pay these costs, and then we're getting hit with the real world.
Exactly.
That's a good take on it, because traditional development can be very expensive, but the fact that the no code movement is to democratize software development and make it where it's accessible to people who can't afford that infrastructure. I just think it's very tone deaf to like ask people to pay so much money for this type of software. I mean, I know lots of people who use Bubble to develop in South America, and the economy there is much different than it is in the United States. And so these costs are exponentially more for a lot of developers in other countries. Right. Bubble's used all around the world. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, we connect in Discord with people from all over
Russia, China, Taiwan, like literally people everywhere in the world. Like, it's crazy how many freelancers that I've spoken to, like on different continents, and that just like, and everyone has their own problems, right? A big problem in Europe is that you can't, their biggest complaint in the EU is that you can't choose your server location, right? Unless you're on like a super expensive plan.
Yeah, and that's another roadblock that I think Bubble, could release themselves from if they just allowed people to host on their own. And this is offered by other services. So, and that's where it comes back to like, this is not something that we're spoiled for asking for, because there are other ways for us to achieve this. It's something that the community as a whole wants. Developers will produce a product that the market wants, and we've said loud and clear that we want to develop our code using no code builders and also own it, export it, and be able to host it wherever is economically sensible for us.
Fair enough. And that really is the point, right? Like, why are we doing, if not, like that's why they're putting these platforms together for people like us who want to do this. But I appreciate this perspective, because it does give you the other side of like, well, Bubble's been eating all of these costs for us up until this point.
Sure.
And naturally, like, we wouldn't know that because we don't see it. But like, to be fair, it has to be sustainable for them too, because Bubble has to set themselves up for success. And that's what, again, going back to like what I like to think is happening, that they're setting themselves up for success in the future. Like, if Bubble fails, we all fail, right? That's absolutely 100% true. That's like, something I'm very sure about. So they have to be putting their pricing structure in a place that's sustainable for them to, be a business long term, or else we're all done. Or else we will get that exported code that everyone's been fucking asking for.
Well, exactly. That's the thing, though, is they say, if Bubble disappears, we'll release our source code. Yeah. And you know what? I bet you there's a lot of people in the community that are like, please release that source code. And so you don't want that. You do not want your community to ever have a reason to want you to fail.
Enterprise software isn't cheap. Yep. Kind of going back to the first comment there. Like, this is, if it was done outside of Bubble, like, there still would be some infrastructure cost to it. and then maybe they're catching up. See, this is like, are they catching up? This is interesting because like you're saying that I didn't know that Flutterflow charges by the like the Firebase like backend, right? There you said that they're charging
Well,
for
I mean,
storage.
that's through Google. Like Google, you'll set up your payment method through them for their servers. And I for example, I'm building an internal tool for my company, which is Restaurant Group in South Carolina and Georgia, and I can select my server location, which I happen to know is in Moncks Corner, South Carolina, U.S. East. Is US East 4, I think, Google server. And so I know that the app I'm developing, all it's the ticketing system for this restaurant group, all of that data is housed in Moncks Corner, South Carolina. It like a mile from the restaurant we have in Somerville.
Yeah,
And that to me is awesome.
it's pretty.
Knowing
It's pretty comforting.
right. And I don't have that. I have no idea where my bubbles, data is stored. I mean, I'm sure I could dig and find, but it's not that easy for me.
Let's dig in a little bit to some of the announcements that they've made. All right, so to let's check our understanding of like the actual pricing. So everyone the change, like everyone can stay on their current plan, which they're now calling the legacy plan, until October of 2024, right? And that means that nobody will see, and that means that you're on the like professional plan right now. I'm on the professional plan, $129 a month. There will be a 10% increase to that legacy plan starting on May 1st, right? So
May 1st this year.
May 1st this year, exactly. So that means that instead of 129, I'll be paying like 135 or something like that. 130.
Something like
that. Or no. It'd be like $12 more, like 140 something. So that would be my for until October 2024. Like we're not paying attention to any workload units or any pricing changes yet. As far as cost goes, right? It's just the old way.
Right.
Now you can switch over into a annual plan to lock in that rate, the current rate, before that 10% increase. If you switch over to annual and basically pay the entire year in one
so you shot. Can do that?
You can do that. I think you have to switch before May 1st.
I heard them say something about not having to lock into an annual plan to get something, but I don't know. Was that
I think what it is, and I've read this like 1,000 times, so I'm pretty confident in this. It's that you're going to see the 10% increase no matter what on March 1st, unless you lock in the previous pricing by switching over to an annual plan, which means that you would pay that big lump sum, all at once.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
And then you
then it might be advisable then if you have existing apps that are going to be on Bubble at least for another year to go ahead and to buy that annual plan.
I'm comfortable on the monthly, right? Like but
it's it's a 10% increase, and
if you want to avoid a 10% increase, that's the way to do it. If you've got like the upfront cash to just kind of like say, okay, I'm pretty confident I'm going to be on Bubble the next 12 months. Let me just prepay for this plan. So yeah, those are the options. And again, even that itself has caused a bit of confusion, right? Like people are not sure whether they can stay on the old pricing. Do I have to do anything to stay on the old plan? Like this is a cause of confusion for people, which is
absolutely. And that's again, I think they should have taken just price out of the equation altogether. If we just were introduced to these workflow units, then and no pricing was discussed at all, then I think it would have naturally started coming up in the community. But instead of being a reaction to how much we're going to be expected to pay in 18 months, it would have been a curiosity of, all right, I get that we need to start building and basing our metrics on this, and then it could have been slowly introduced. Over 18 months.
I think they just wanted to be done with pricing. They literally, it's a year ago since they made that initial pricing announcement, right?
And there was a year before that. This is the third announcement.
The third pricing announcement.
I believe so. I would have to go back to the forums and check again, but I'm pretty sure there was one like in 2021, 2022 now, and now this is the 2023 big one.
They're so overpricing at this point. I think that they just wanted to get it all out and done
I
with.
get that. I understand that. I mean, I empathize with wanting to just rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've got to.
But then this is the result of that, right? Like there's
Right.
going to be a lot of strong emotions in reaction to it, right? This is the reaction to that. All right. So what I wanted to do was just take a look. So they released another update today. Josh did. And I think that was one of the ones. Let's actually take a look at it.
Can you pull it up on?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Let me pull this. This was the most recent update that they were talking about today. So the summary, I don't know if we want to read this whole thing, but let's just get to this summary. Let's break these down a little bit. We spent the last few days reading and listening to the community feedback. This post summarizes the adjustments we're making in response to what we've learned. We're making the key activities crucial to scaling your app on Bubble cost fewer workload units than originally planned by 50 to 99% beginning this Thursday. What does that mean to you? Because I'm a little confused by this.
So that's where later in his post, he has a graph, or I mean, a chart that says like this action costs this many workflow units. And he talks about their ingredients to make a final product, a recipe. And when you do an action in Bubble, it might, write to the database, or it might do a query at the database, and then it might display a row of records. And in each one of those, like, has a value attached to it, and you add up all those values, and that's your workflow units for that one action in Bubble. Mm-hmm. And so they have said the most commonly used, I don't know if it's commonly used, or the activities that are the most crucial to scaling your app in Bubble cost fewer. So they have turned down that dial from 0.5 workflow units to 0.3 workflow units.
Okay, yeah, and let's take a look at that chart too as we go down here, because we can really get a sense of what costs what, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's a big point of contention for me. This is where I was talking about the, who's controlling those dials, because from the time they released this to 7 days later, they've just adjusted the dials, and now our apps cost less. And so, who's to say that they
you can't turn it up just as easy, right?
Like turn it up just as easy, or it'll be forever changing. And so
it's amazing to me how much trust this requires, right? Like this is all based on trust. It's a relationship that we as developers have with this company, that we're really placing our faith in the right decisions here. It's kind of shocking, like how much, like, it's not just business. Like there's a tremendous amount of or trust that goes into business. Same thing with I guess that's just any relationship, right?
Right.
But I don't know.
We have to be vulnerable here, because Bubble can hurt us.
We are releasing new tools to help make workload unit consumption easier to analyze and understand. Our first releases include the new subscription planner and the ability to see how much workload units is consumed by each workflow and action in the login tabs. This is interesting to me. Have you checked this out yet?
I did click through down to the pie chart and see what types of actions cause, what percentage of my workflow units are caused by certain actions. Yeah. And that's nice. I think that helps give me a clear understanding of what's going on, and it'll allow me to be a better developer on Bubble, knowing. No, I saw somebody who had a workflow that checked to see if you had subscribed or not. And it was just like a payment checker, because he had a piece of paid content that was behind a paywall.
Right.
And that took up 50% of his workflow units, because every time they loaded something, it had to do an action on every single user to just check, has this person paid or not? And then it would display the data, and he could see that through the.
So now that kind of what is the answer there, right? So this brings up a larger question. Let me stop sharing for a second. This brings up a larger question of what's the answer there? That might be a feature that's really useful to his business,
Right.
Like, does he
But
just not do that anymore
well,
because it's costing so much?
well, I would say that that is an opportunity for him to develop it in a new way
Hmm.
if given the tools. If, for example, he could just write like if he could build it into a conditional in some other workflow where he's loading the page, or if he could have a totally separate page for members and a separate page for people who are not members, and instead of running workflows to show that element, maybe he just loads
Yeah.
wholly. I don't know. I don't know what those answers are because I haven't been given
Yeah.
the tools and the breakdowns on.
I ask only because I'm in a similar situation where I'm one of my, my largest clients, they're using 40, close to 40 million workflow units per month, and that's just going to be ongoing. And there's 5 users on this app. It's an internal app that's processing a lot of data. And
Yeah,
Bubble has, even in one of the more recent posts that Tatiana said, she's like, we know that Bubble is not that efficient at processing large amounts of data, what
yeah,
thousands and
bulk
millions,
data.
exactly,
Mhm.
millions of records at a time. Right now, they're consuming a lot of workload units, but in the future, I think she said in Q3,
Right.
that's going to be more efficient.
Oh yeah.
So like, what do I do in the meantime? Do I just wait to see if that's going to be, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
in other words, these are the kinds of things that I'm like real world examples that I'm also thinking about of, like, similar to what the example that you gave with your friend. Um, it's a reality, and I don't know. I don't know the best way to move forward because I'm not sure what that looks like yet.
Yeah, it's challenging to
But I am
find
interested
the
to
right answer.
see, like you said, that you can, like, I haven't looked at it yet where you're drilling down and seeing which actions and workflows and events are actually consuming the large amount. I haven't looked at that yet. So maybe
It
it's an
it
easy fix.
it doesn't go so far right now. I mean, I think that that's part of the that's part of these updates that they're wanting to release. But it
Mm,
doesn't go so far down in like exactly what workflow action is costing so many workflow units. I think it just gives you a like this is API calls, this is page load time, this is writes to the database or something, reads to um, searches. It gives you some information.
I'm I'm
So worth
hoping
looking at.
that I'm really hoping that that does tell you exactly like which workflows are, like, I hope we can drill down that far because
Yeah,
that will
right.
make optimizing your app a ton easier if you know exactly what to focus on. Adjusting the pricing. Developers could have also adjusted their pricing. I think like freelancers could have adjusted,
Right.
right?
Right. Freelancers could adjust the pricing for who they're developing for.
Yeah.
SaaS products could adjust their pricing to their customers based on the usage of their customers. Um, it's like trickle down usage because um, if you build an internal app, is this an internal app that your users are going to check for 5 minutes a day, or is it something they're going to be working on for
Y-
9 to 5, and
Yeah.
each one's using it a lot? So, yeah, it allows developers to adjust their pricing in response to Bubble's costs,
Yeah.
um,
Passing that along.
which
Uh,
ultimately is going to happen. I mean, it'll have to happen, I guess.
I don't think freelancers and agencies can afford to eat any cost.
Right. Yeah.
The margins are, especially with agencies, the margins are fairly low because you're paying developers. Um, okay, so we're increasing the workload units in the free plan to 50,000 workload units and giving all paid apps 100K free development workload units. So I guess that's in addition to what they've allowed. Oh wait, and that's
I
that's
think so.
right. Like, so
So
when
it's like it's 275K for the personal, and then like most of my apps are on the personal, so those are the ones I was paying attention to.
now is that in both, like, the personal's 275K, is that divided amongst the development and live environments?
I'm assuming so. I'm assuming that it's well, no, no. Okay, so it says free development workflow or work units. That's the question because all right, so we are increasing the work units in the free plan to 50K work units and giving all paid apps 100K free development work units. So maybe it's not on top of the the 175K, maybe those 100K units are only used in the development environment.
Maybe.
These are questions.
I mean, obviously it'd be better if they were, 275K per, like one set for development and one set for live, right? Like that's what I would.
Like separate the usage and.
I would hope, but I don't
I mean,
know.
that would be great. I don't think it's that way.
That is all right. So let's scroll down a little. Maybe he addresses that somewhere here. The bulk of this post will be dedicated to changes we're making to workload in response to the most common themes from the feedback below. But first, I want to help clarify a couple of points and confusion and share updates. All right, you don't have to switch to annual pricing to remain on the legacy pricing structure. We were talking about this before. This is not a change from our last announcement. If you're currently on a paid plan that uses capacity, regardless of your billing frequency, you can stay on your legacy plan until October in 2024. Okay, so we have that right. We were describing before. Switching to annual pricing before May 1st will lock you into a discounted price for the next year.
Okay.
Perfect.
That makes sense.
There are custom plans for high workload unit apps. If you have over 40 million, right? This interests me.
This might be you.
Yeah, exactly. And are looking for consistent discounted pricing, please contact our sales team for a custom plan. That scares the shit out of me. That scares the bejesus out of me. A new subscription planning tool has been released today. It enables you to input your current workload unit consumption and get a recommendation for the most cost-effective way to add a workload unit tier.
If applicable.
If applicable. Since we're making an important change to workload unit calculations, we're recommending taking this Friday's usage and multiplying by 30 to estimate your new level of consumption as input for the planning tool. All right, so what they're saying here is don't really make a decision on this until Friday when the new calculations are being shown. Are you reading that correctly too?
Right, yeah, because that'll be the real monthly number for your apps. After they have changed the dials, we're going to see what the rate they're going to sell us at is.
Right. So we're literally like watching. We're talking about this as it's unfolding, right? This announcement was made 6 hours ago, right? And this stuff moves so fast because of Twitter and the forum. It seems like they announced this months ago, and because there's so much reaction and posts to it, but it was days ago. This announcement was made today.
Right. Yeah. It's a very active situation.
Seriously. All right, we're increasing the free plan to 50K workload units. Developers of new apps can build and learn much before they need to upgrade. Okay. All paid plan. Now, I don't know. I feel like I guess that's a good thing, but 50,000 workload units, based on what I've seen, doesn't seem like a lot.
Is that the total 50K?
I think so.
Okay. That's just a start learning bubble.
I think so.
Okay.
And I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but based on my usage, I guess I'm feeling like that's low, but whatever. We'll see. I'm gonna wait. Until Friday to really make an informed decision. All paid plans will now include 100K of free development workload units. We want to support users in their development phase and encourage building testing. All right. I still don't know if it breaks down.
So in the bubble backend, you can see what workflow units were run in your development environment, what workflow units were run in your live environment. So I'm assuming that 100K right there is going to be credited to the development environment before your other workflow units come into play.
Okay. So that will only be towards development.
Right.
Okay. Let's scroll down a little. Let's get to that.
It's a blue chart. Yeah, that's some of the updates they're going to be doing later week. But yeah, this is the blue chart that shows the dials.
It's kind of small. It's hard to read.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to read.
All right, loading page HTML is 0.15 of a workload unit.
Right.
Each call to a server side plugin action 0.2. So that's to say that a server-side plugin action is more expensive than a HTML page load.
Right. So this is how his analogy was using ingredients in a recipe. And so, if you needed to load the page as HTML and also do that server side plugin action, then you add those together, and then that's how much that process cost
Got it.
for each use.
Wait, can you say that again?
So yeah, the analogy was like using it as ingredients in a recipe. So each one of these are your ingredients. So loading the page HTML, and then the server side plugin action. You take those and you add them together, and then that's your total workflow unit cost of whatever just happened on the page.
Got it.
Whatever you just did.
Okay, so simple addition. Each millisecond spent executing a server-side plugin action. Okay. Performing a database search, 0.3. See, that's expensive. Like that's an expensive action, performing a database search. So apps that need to or are just doing it because they haven't optimized yet for database searches, and that's a lot. I see a lot of people, especially people that are new to Bubble, they do a lot of searches because they don't know that you can send elements from an element that's being stored on the front end to a workflow, and then just process that.
Right.
There a lot
saves you a whole level of searches you can take out, and you're right. A lot of people developing are not developing very efficient apps, and so that's going to bite them.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest going to be like the biggest changes for people, or the most expensive thing I think in most apps is going to be, I think, this, right? Like the data optimizing when you don't need to be doing server-side queries, database searches, right? The read operations, like that's probably going to be the most and this too, right? Well, let's go in order. I don't want to jump around. Each character of data returned from the database.
Give me one second. I'm going to text this wagger.
Go ahead. I'm going to keep talking.
Go for it.
0.000003. All right, so that's each character. Does that mean each like letter or each number? I think so.
I believe so. Yeah, in each character there.
Okay, and that obviously it's a tremendously small number, but I'm sure that could add up quick. I don't know. Each result returned from the database. It's 0.015. Okay, so this is. What is the difference between each result returned from the database and performing a database search? Those to me seem like the same thing.
Right. Well, so the first one there, my understanding is that you do your search on the database, and then you also return items from the database. And so if you do a search on your database and then you return 100 items, you're going to pay for the search, and they're going to pay for each of those items.
Oh, son of a bitch. I thought that it...
So you add them up, and then that's your workflow cost.
Okay, so I thought that performing a database search included what was returned. Clearly, that's not the case. It's kind of a combination of this, and this. The database search is its own cost. What gets returned is its own cost.
Right.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. See, I could see how this would add up. Each data triggered, workflow initiated. I'm using a few database triggers. 0.05. A little less expensive than the search itself, but so having less results returned from the database would obviously be optimal here, right? Like not having so many results.
Right.
Each call to watch search for real-time updates. Do you understand what that means? Each call to watch for real-time.
I'm sorry, it's a little hard to see because it's so small.
Yeah, I know. It says each call to watch search for real-time updates. I think that's like almost like a webhook situation. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so that would probably be like you can do a single query, or you can do the live updating. And so if like an item in your database changes, Bubble typically is serving that in real time, but there's a cost to that, of course.
Yep.
So like in Flutter, I know doing the database calls to Firebase, you can change that setting. You can say only do this a single time, and then if you build a refresh button, you can have it refresh your data and update. Whereas in Bubble, it's just by default going to continuously update.
I see. Omar saying, uh, paying for records return craziness. Um, I mean,
I mean, like, you know, there is a cost to all of this, and which is why, like, I totally understand the usage, you know,
yeah, it
like, but when you see it broken down like this and you're trying to digest it, it's uncomfortable
because you.
to like start adding it up, and like you can't like scope your projects anymore.
Exactly, and I think that's the thing. Like I'm thinking about all of the apps that I built and am going to build, and like having to keep all this in mind is, I
Right.
suppose, like it's impossible, right? You're never going to know this fully, and
Mhm.
to try to estimate it would just be like hours of, probably unnecessary work. But at least we asked for this. In fairness, we asked for this breakdown,
We did. I
right?
mean, we do want the
Yeah,
transparency, but it doesn't mean we're gonna, you know, like what we get or even agree with it,
or be
or
scared. Yeah, not
um,
be scared. Not yeah,
or not be terrified about
yeah.
the
I wonder. I
future.
wonder. Like to Michael's earlier point, like is the the number of records that gets returned, does that come with an infrastructure cost in a traditional development environment? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think so. You know, the way I've always explained it, especially with text content, is just like an Excel database. Like whenever I'm teaching someone Bubble who's never used Bubble before, but obviously, you know, lots of people have used Excel and they know what a record is and a column and you know, items in a database. And the way that you can operate with Excel, and I mean that doesn't take much processing power. So like I know I don't think that it, you know, it is expensive, and that these traditional apps can't be built super
Mm.
efficiently. So
Omar
Omar, what did Omar say
Omar
there?
said it should be relative to the size of the data returned rather than a flat rate per row.
Well, so it also is the size of the data, because there is a cost per character
Character, exactly.
return as well. So you have to add, they are being 100% transparent here. You know, you're getting the row, and then you're paying for that. You're gonna, you know, get every single character. You're gonna pay for every single one of those. You know,
Yeah.
we ask them to break it down
They broke it.
one all the
They
way.
broke it down for us. Yeah,
They broke it down all the way. We asked for
it
this.
is. Yeah, I don't think they could have made it any more granular than the size of the like the number of characters, right? Like it can't get. I don't
Right.
know. It can't get any more granular than that. Um, and that would be which one was that again? I know you can't see it
Uh, Yeah, like each character of data returned for the
from the database point, and this
it
is a minuscule
right.
number, right? Like this.
It's a minuscule number, but you know, you add that up on a large
Sure.
file, and
Okay, let's see if any other of these are interesting. Each item deleted from the database, point one.
right.
Each item written or modified to the database, point five. That's a big number, right? Like relative to these other ones here. That's probably the biggest one we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think point 0.5 is the largest number on that list. Um,
Okay, point five. Performing an aggregate query in the database, point two. Performing an aggregate query. I don't even know what that is. What's an aggregate query?
um, is that like a filtered search on the database, or like a
I guess.
is it searching for a field inside of Omar might be able to help.
Yeah, Omar. What the hell is an aggregated an aggregated query? Aggregate. I know what that is. That's like if like if you're in a repeating group and you say grouped by and then you aggregate it, like you sum them, you aggregate.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. Because then it mentions grouped by just beneath that group by query in the database. So these are like data calls that go into a repeating group and that gives you the option to like group by and then
Oh, so that's
aggregate
like, is
them.
that like searching for a list?
Yes, exactly. You're searching
Okay.
list.
So you're searching for a list of like documents, records instead of just a single item.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you group by
And
okay.
it's usually on a page load thing. Like you wouldn't do this in a workflow, right? Like you would do this normally in a repeating group to display information on the page,
Right.
or in a graph. Like if you do a lot of graphing, like I've done a ton of that, like with the like you're grouping by a month, right? Because you want to aggregate all of the data, all of these sales that happened in a single month, right? You're grouping those
Right.
together. So that's expensive too, right? So like these will add up. This is like on page load or whatever. That will add up. And these
Okay.
are
Yeah.
expensive queries, you know, again, just relative to the other ones here. Inbound
Mhm.
call to apps data and workflow API 0.01. Inbound API call. I don't do too many of those. We don't have any with that many inbound API calls to my Bubble
Yeah.
apps.
I haven't set that up, worked with that really.
By test
Sent
sent to or by test. Oh, bytes.
bytes.
What an asshole. I'm saying by test. Bytes. Bytes sent to or from an app via inbound or outbound API call.
Okay.
Bits. So they're measuring that in bits.
So if you are receiving data from an external API, that's the charge of how large that data is.
It's hard to say whether or not that's generous or you know, I don't know because I know I don't. We've never seen like how in bytes how much like the API response is. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I've never seen that in like the.
I mean, the response would be like that, just that like, well, most of it is going to be just a text response, all broken down. You can view the view response when you do an API call and you get that document there. However large that document is typically going to be the response
Does it
size.
tell you like in it like a size of it though? Like this response
I don't
is
think so yet.
yeah maybe
I would imagine that part of their tools they're developing is that you could look at a log of your API calls and see a workflow unit next to each one of
yeah.
those on. I mean, I don't know if that's actually being developed, but it'd be nice to see
I
that.
guess that's the only way to know how big those responses are. Get a sense of how big your each outbound API call made to an external API. Each outbound API call made to an external API 0.1.
Right.
Expensive, right?
That is expensive because those are things that are like, especially if you have live updating apps that track things in real time and you're running those API calls, nonstop. That I've seen that add up on a lot of people's apps.
So but that is less expensive than an inbound API call, right? Like this is 0.1. Where's our inbound one?
Each inbound was 0.01, right?
0.001. So it would be yes, inbound would be more. So if the way that I'm thinking of it is like if you have, a real-time update, it would make sense to be sending that request from external to your Bubble app as opposed to the other way around, right? Like if you're trying to send it from Bubble.
Well, I mean, you also have to think the internal API call, that's just that first charge. And then you're probably going to add on a database search, and then you're going to have to add on,
Yeah,
the items in that.
that's
So
true.
like, I don't know I just don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody knows yet.
that's a good point. Running a server-side action workflow 0.5, or is that 0.6? No, that's 0.6. Server-side workflow action, pretty common, right? Back-end workflows, API workflows, recursive workflows, pretty common thing. That's 0.6. Each row retrieved by our SQL connector plugin. I don't use SQL connector plugin, so I don't care too much.
I don't either. Yeah.
Each call made by SQL connector plug. Oh, retrieved and each call made, adding a new item to our scheduler. So scheduling API workflows in the future. Okay. All right. I mean, at the very least, I appreciate this chart because it's super transparent. It scares me because a lot of these things are so, like the most expensive things are basic, like CRUD operations, right? Like editing a something in the database 0.5, like those are so basic, and those are the most that require the most horsepower, I guess, from Bubble.
Right. And Well, I mean, you think about it. It's like now we have all this pricing anxiety. Is it now we're just over analyzing the? In my opinion, I think a lot of people are just over analyzing these charts, looking line by line.
Yeah.
What is all this going to cost? And I mean, I hope most of it just is irrelevant. Like the cost of retrieving data from this database search isn't really anything for me. Yes, there is a cost down the line. Yes, something had to happen on a server for this to process.
Mhm.
And yes, I am paying for it, but I hope that it's
Yeah,
negligible.
same here. It's like zooming out from like the nitty gritty that we just got into. Yeah, I agree. Like if these plan tiers are set in a way that's fair and that makes sense for the applications that we're all building, none of the like it's good to know, but none of that really matters because you're
Right.
just like an extra $100. Like if that's the case, like I'm fine paying that into a system where I believe that Bubble is going to be, you know,
Absolutely.
profitable and successful. Like I do think their current pricing is probably too cheap based on
Right.
what they,
I agree.
like. So I'm okay paying that, just so that but it doesn't like. I also don't want to have to not do projects on Bubble because I run a ton of CRUD operations on data. You know what I
Right.
mean? I don't want to have to make that decision. Uh,
Right. Like you and I were talking the other week about my website that I run on Bubble for the restaurant,
mhm.
and you were like, "Oh, you run on Bubble?" I was like, "Yeah, like Bubble's my tool for everything." And I mean, the way I have it displaying menu data um, and searching the database, it's not going to be sustainable for me to keep it on Bubble um, for that.
Damn.
So I'm going to have to say, well, okay, for like a project like that, it's just going to be easier for me to put it on a WordPress site or something, build it somewhere else, and just host it somewhere really cheap because you know
Is that
it doesn't make
is
sense.
that your kind of analysis based on the workload units that you're being shown today in the usage tab?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that is what today's units are. I'll look on Friday, and maybe it will make sense where, okay, this isn't going to cost me any extra, um, and I'll leave it on here, or maybe I'll just display things a little bit differently in Bubble, and it won't be as smart of a program for the restaurant website, but it'll still serve its purpose. Um, but I don't know, it just disappoints me that I'm not able to really use all of my Bubble knowledge to like make this the best restaurant website
Yeah,
possible.
same here. And like I mean how like it's a website, right? Like
Yeah.
where's the majority of the workload coming from? Is it like page loads
It's
or
um it's on the menu display. So like I have it where you can view our lunch menu and our dinner menu, and all of the items on there are they're sectioned and they're a bunch of repeating groups, and it's loading in the data from the database on each menu item that's tagged in each, like, all right, this item is on the lunch menu, its lunch price is this, its dinner price is this, and it's dynamic when they're
got
you
it.
know
Yes.
viewing. And so a lot of dynamic actions happening, and it gets 3,500 visitors a week on average. And so it's not, I mean, it's getting traffic.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just, I'm gonna have to figure out what to do there.
Gotcha, man. I hope you don't have to move off. I really do. Let's see what Omar has
Uh,
here. Regarding the API calls, a cool tool to build would be a batching service, something where Bubble can send one request to the batch service. The batch service can execute multiple calls, then aggregate everything and send it back to Bubble.
oh yeah. I mean, that's something that I could imagine a plugin is going to be created for,
Yeah,
where it has code that can collect your call and then send it all in one go. I mean, it's a pretty creative way to like get around that, like the front door cost for the one API call. I don't know how worth it'll be. Like, if you're still going to be paying for the response, and like if that's really the meat of the
yeah,
cost, then it might save you, $1 on a $500 bill. So
Is it worth it?
I don't
But
know.
it opens up a whole nother avenue to talk about. It's like, well, if even for API calls, what if you were doing that with CRUD operations too? What if you were doing that, just like almost outsourcing your CRUD operations in a similar way that you're doing with Xano? Whenever you, like if you connected a bubble app to Xano before, you're basically like Xano is doing all of the backend stuff for you, right? So does that become a cheaper option? Are they incentivizing us to use a tool like Xano and the backend and just have Bubble as our front end? Because we know we're getting a flat rate with Xano. Is that a bad thing?
And that goes back to, again, like the cost for the builder and then the cost for the data and the usage. If most of our backend is running on Xano and Bubble's just our front end and our user interface, is that the model they want? I don't think so. I think they want us to go all in on Bubble, and they just want to control the dials. I get that, but
I think so. I think so too. I think I can't imagine that they really what benefit would that be to be to be on multiple tools to that? Why would that benefit Bubble?
The data fairly static. If talking about the restaurant website, the data is fairly static, yes. However, I have it where there is a back end where people can change the prices of any item at any time. They can add a new item. So I just built it to all be dynamic off the bat. So I mean, I'm going to have to make it static, and maybe I can make it where, I don't know. I mean, there are ways around this. It's not like this is a problem that I have to move off Bubble for. I can certainly fix this. But it's just like, again, I can't use Bubble to its full potential the way I would want.
Yeah, understood. All right, man. So to wrap this all up, I've been going at it for about an hour now. Happy to drop any questions in here. Omar, couldn't you Cloudflare to cache all that stuff?
Not with the way Bubble works, we don't have as many options. There are definitely ways I can build it where it's going to work, but being in the Bubble ecosystem and and being forced to use the tools they give us, I don't think that that's an option right now.
I don't know. I don't know how I would do that either. All right. So kind of in summary here, we're all concerned for the future of when we're going to be able to, or if we have to make the decision to move off, I don't know, move some apps off of Bubble and use it only for certain things. Does this narrow what you can build on Bubble? I don't think that there's any. I think at the very least, I think that they are being receptive to the feedback. It is pretty, like, the feedback is pretty aggressive. Like there's a lot of emotional posts and not for bad reason. It's again, a lot of people, like, coming back to what we talked about in the beginning, a lot of people's livelihood are staked on the decisions that Bubble makes. So it's going to have an impact. But they are at least trying to, like, they heard the more transparent calculations about workload. They've given us a chart of what that breaks down to. They're recalculating what they've recalculating the workload units that we're going to see Friday. So they are receptive to this feedback, and I do take that into consideration when making any decisions. Like, at least they're listening, right? Nick, I think you make a great point also of just like who's turning these dials and how are these things going to be decided going forward?
It's all based on trust, and right now the trust is wavering, and so
we're gonna see.
April 19th they will have their is it April 19th or April 20th?
It is
April 20th.
Yeah, I've got it on my calendar somewhere. Hang on, I'll tell you. It is, yes, April 20th. How to optimize workload webinar.
So that's a webinar that Bubble will be hosting to explain how to optimize your applications, how to really make sense of these workflow units. So I expect they're going to have more tools built out by then and be able to give the community a much more detailed
I feel like
explanation.
we're gonna need more than an hour for that. It's an hour-long call, but I think they're gonna do multiple ones, right? Like they're probably. I'm sure that's not gonna be the only one.
They'll start there, and we'll see what the response is, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. But
So
I would like to see more conversations like this around like what other people's concerns are and like how it affects their apps too. I don't know
right.
whether to keep like doing this. Like, should we talk about like as these things unfold? I'm not sure, but it feels like people want to voice their opinion about this, and you know, this is a cool way to
Yeah, I
do
mean, it
it.
affects a lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
it like so.
All right, man. I think we
All
said
right.
all we're gonna say tonight. I appreciate you jumping on and being a first to kind of voice an opinion um, on this whole thing.
Absolutely.
I guess we'll
Yeah.
probably have another one of these. So if anyone else is interested, let me know. And we'll try to have a conversation around it.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you for having me, John. I really appreciate
All right,
it.
buddy. Always a pleasure.
So, all right.